It's great to be with you this morning. How many of you stayed up later than you probably should have last night? Wow. Yeah, great. You know what I think we learned last night is that the Lord and all the components of the Trinity are Buckeye fans. We saw that on display. It's good. Yeah. I get to teach today about this word, Sabbath, found in the fourth commandment. In Exodus chapter 20, it picks up in verse 8. The last time I taught about Sabbath was July 2nd, 2017. So I want to start by apologizing for not having really paused here since then deliberately, deeply, because this is such a beautiful invitation. I never want us to miss it. So I'll try to be better about keeping this on the forefront a little more often. It's this particular commandment is one of two that are written in the positive, right? So if you've been here for the series, the 10 commandments are the guardrails for the relationship. God's inviting us into this deep relationship. So a covenant is the process of establishing a new relationship. The vows or the laws are the guardrails that help that really be a good relationship. They're the agreed upon statements that we will do this together. And this particular commandment is really It's the longest one in the whole 10 Commandments. And I think it's the one that is probably the easiest to avoid and still, say we're following after Jesus well. Does that make sense? Yes. I've been guilty of that. But if you don't remember, I'm going to say a lot of things today, but I hope you'll remember this. By design, Sabbath is weird and necessary. Weird, yet necessary. By design. Matter of fact, I would encourage you to look up the definition of weird not in the Urban Dictionary, because that's just not even accurate, but in the real definition of the word weird is pretty compelling. If you look in Merriam-Webster, the Old English Dictionary, it's unique. So that's something you can do later this afternoon while you're watching the Browns try to see what that looks like for them today. Speaking of weird, how about this? I want to see after this video how many of you remember this commercial from a time vault talking about brakes. Because it's interesting, we avoid brakes, but so many businesses try to lure us in with brakes. Watch this gem. Until you have a heart attack. Sweet haircuts. I don't think they make pom-poms like that anymore. Or tube socks, or... How many of you remember that commercial? Yeah, we should all get coffee. There's about 7 of us. Yeah, crazy, isn't it? You deserve a break today. You know who originated that whole idea is God. God's the one going, you deserve it. I want you to have it. It's good for you. Have a break. And McDonald's stole it. And so they're the evil empire. We're going to jump in to Exodus chapter 20. And I want you to read it in the International Children's Bible. By the way, don't let that shake you. It is a very thorough translation. And I really like the way they handle this particular passage in Exodus. Remember to keep the Sabbath as a holy day. Would you say the word holy? Holy. The word holy there is the same, in the Hebrew it's kadosh. It's the same word that we get to be separate or set apart or distinct or sanctify, right? So God's saying, and this is God speaking, remember, don't forget to hang on to this special day, and don't let it be like every other day. It's really good if you don't. You may work and get everything done during 6 days each week. But the seventh day is a day of rest to honor the Lord your God. On that day, no one may do any work, not you, your son or daughter, your men or women slaves, neither your animals nor the foreigners living in your cities may work. It's interesting. It's interesting. As we break down those few verses, here's what we begin to see. In those couple of verses, God is saying, there's something really unique that I want you to experience. I'm inviting you to experience this beautiful, different day every week. Work for 6 days. Get everything done in 6 days. Work for 6 days. It's interesting, the Bible doesn't look at work as a punishment. It looks at work as an opportunity, as a reward, right? It's good to work. Work for 6 days so that you can rest on the seventh day. So the first data point I want you to hang on to is this. We work so that we may rest. We don't rest so that we can just work. God's not saying, get rested up because you've got to work more. That's not what this is. This is about rhythm in life. It's about a good rhythm for your life. So the inline placement of Sabbath is pause, pause, pause. Keep it in perspective, right? So God's really big on wanting us to work. Matter of fact, the Bible talks a lot about work. In James it says if you don't work, you shouldn't eat, right? Everybody should do their part. God is in favor of work and revenue to provide, right? It's a good thing. Matter of fact, we are too. What we do in Guatemala is we build relationships that can be sustainable, and then we come beside them in their goals as we share life together so that they can move forward. We help, but we don't just give. Does that make sense? Yes. So I'm for helping people. The working poor in America need our help. It's so hard for people that are in that, right on that line, right? It's easy for us to sit back and point fingers like they're just not working hard enough, where the deck has been stacked against them, right? Because some of these families work multiple jobs, but it's hard for them to break because, right, especially in parts of our city where gentrification's happening and their rent has gone way up, right? Anyway, I'm not against helping. What the Bible is against is enabling poverty. Does that make sense? I hope you know my heart. I'm not against helping people that need it. What I am against is enabling poor behaviors that don't promote breakthrough and personal responsibility. Okay? And that's why the government should never be the solution to all these things. What the government's big on is dumping resources. What they're not big on is forging relationships. Does that make sense? It takes both. It takes both along the way. Anyway, we work so that we can rest. Because if you never work, you don't really need rest. You don't appreciate rest. Does that make sense? You don't value because it's not different. It's not different then. It's not holy. It's not separate. And here's something else that I think is really interesting. If you go back, this is really interesting. No, go back to 8 through 10 if you don't mind. Thank you. When we break this verse down a little farther, God says 6 days, rest on the seventh. The seventh, honor God. Let's have this relationship together. It's good. I want some time with you. It's good for us. On that day, there's 7 categories of people or things that shouldn't work. Families, right? You shouldn't do it. Your kids shouldn't do it. Sons, daughters. Let's rest together. Have you ever tried to have a break, like a true day of rest, when somebody else in your house isn't? Doesn't feel very restful, does it? You're trying to kick back, read a book, and the vacuum's running. Oh, isn't that special? I don't feel very rested, right? You know what I mean? There's some beauty in this. What God's saying is it's better if we do it together. It's better if we pause intentionally. It's better if we go wide in this, because as a community, then everybody can embrace it. It's good. But it's really cool. He goes further than that. He says you're slaves. Now, slavery was a very accepted practice all throughout the world at that time, different than what in many ways different than what we understand in American history, but similar also in many ways, right? The Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the law code is the only holy book that begins to give humanitarian guardrails to say this is good. They need a break. They need a break. And remember, when the Israelites, the Hebrews, were still in Egypt, they didn't get a break. They were slaves. They worked every day, 7 days a week. They worked long hours until the quota of bricks was met. They didn't get a pause, and God's going, I want you to have this. I want you to experience it. As a matter of fact, it's so good. I want everybody to experience it. I want everybody to stop. Understand, it's not worth grinding your life away and having a negative return at the end. I want your men and women servants to have the same refreshment that you are welcome to have. He was teaching this all the way back. Remember, he brings them out of Egypt and out of their captivity, parts the sea. They're going, and they're like, we don't have water. We'll take care of water. We don't have anything to eat. You want bread? I'll give you bread. Matter of fact, it's going to show up every morning. Manna's going to show up every morning on the first 5 days of the week. Go out and just get enough for that day. Don't hoard it. God's teaching that hoarding isn't a good thing, right? You threw the manna and quail. Don't be a hoarder. And on the 6th day, I want you to get enough for 2 days. So get enough for the 7th day, because on the 7th day, I don't want you to have to go out and get anything. I want you to be able to just chill. I want you to be able to relax. This is good. And God's now in the guardrails of the vows. We're going to do relationship together. Don't lose sight, guys, that I want you and I to rest at the same time together. Amen. I miss my time with you. Animals? PETA would love this. It's truly, right? It's the first place, and it's the only place where we see that consistent and intentional care for your animals is beneficial for them and for you and for everybody. Because, see, if your animals aren't resting, then really neither are you. In an agrarian context, if your animals aren't resting and you're plowing fields with, right, God's going, shut the tractor down. Right? So interesting. And then verse 11, we'll jump down there. The reason is that in 6 days, the Lord made everything. He made the sky, the earth, the sea, everything in them. On the 7th day, he rested. So God's saying, look, I did everything in 6 days. Now, I don't know, is a day like a 24-hour period, or a day is 1,000 years? Listen, we don't know. I find it interesting what we want to argue about. That's not the hill to die on. What we do know is that God, the designer, the creator, the one who speaks it all into existence, goes, man, after 6 days, I saw that it was good, and I wanted to pause and rest. And the reason I want you to do it is I did it, and I found out how great it was. Really good. So the Lord blessed the Sabbath, the Shabbat day, and he made it different. Made it different. He made it distinct. He set it apart. He sanctified it. It's good for us. I was reading a book that I'm reading. The author's talking about a friend of his that that is a horticulturalist, which is a fancy name for a gardener. And he had a rose garden, and he became really versed in rose terminology and how to care and prune. And I've had roses. The last rose bushes we had in the house we bought, I tore them all out after like year 3. I'm like, I am over these things. I'm not a horticulturalist. But he would get up early in the morning, and then he'd he would care for them. He'd go to work, and he's constantly keeping all the bugs. Bugs love roses, and he's doing all the things to make sure that none of the bugs find a buffet bar on his roses. And he would come home from work, and he would go back to his roses. And one morning, he was drinking coffee, and he realized he no longer enjoyed the roses because the roses felt like work. So when he came home that afternoon, instead of getting any tools, instead of getting a watering can, instead of any of that, he went out and he sat in the garden and just looked at the flowers that he once found beautiful and enjoyed them again. It's kind of crazy. We work so hard, we barely enjoy what we have. Right? We get on this hamster wheel of life, and we don't slow down, and we live in a rapidly secularizing culture. Yes. Since World War II, we are in radical secularization. Yes. Meaning, well, I won't unpack all that, but it's just true. Since World War II, so many things in America have morphed. They haven't just gradually changed, they have morphed. Right. Yes. And I think we all are tempted to abandon the invitation or not open the envelope of Sabbath and embrace it. So the second data point I'd have you hang on to is this: Sabbath rest is God's design criteria. Amen. It's God's design criteria for your soul. It's God's design criteria for your stress. It's God's design criteria for your restoration. It requires Sabbathing. God wants us to do that. I've not always been, well, for most of my life, I've never been good at that. I tend toward some workaholism, which, by the way, can look really noble in our culture, especially in the church. And it's still as much a problem and really a missing of the mark for what God would have for us as a lot of other things. And I remember the first cruise Melissa and I ever went on, we were doing a Caribbean cruise, and it was our 10th anniversary, and I wanted to surprise her, so I bought these. I shouldn't plan a lot of those things. It was in September, 15 years ago this month, and I wanted to really love her and surprise her, and I booked it knowing we were moving, but thinking this would be a nice break, right? So we moved here 15 years ago this month from Atlanta to start the church. So here's how it went down. We are in church in Atlanta. The big truck with all our stuff is already on the road. My Blazer with a U-Haul for all the stuff that wouldn't fit in the big truck is in the parking lot. All the kids' stuff is in our car, in the car seats, and I'm going to pull the trailer. Melissa's going to be behind me, and we're going to go to Kentucky right after church. Great idea. It's only 8.5 hours. And, we didn't leave until like 1 in the afternoon. And the kids were really into that. It's good planning, Dad, you genius. So we deadhead up to Ashland, where Melissa's folks lived, and we stay the night. Melissa and the kids stay a couple more days. I get up super early the next morning because I've chose to attend a conference in Columbus called New Church Specialties. Right. I'm sure I absorbed all of it. And so I get up super early, and I drive to Johnstown, where we have a storage place that we were renting, and I unload the U-Haul so I could drop it off because I'm cheap and I didn't want to have to pay for another day of rental. So I drop it off, and then I go to this conference, And I'm like a sweaty mess. I mean, there was nothing good about any of this. And I go to the conference, and then that night I go to our 750 square foot apartment in Mount Vernon to try to set that up. The next day, Melissa and the kids come because we have to register Nathan for kindergarten. And then the day after that, they go home to Melissa's parents. The kids go back, and Melissa and I the next morning are going to get up at 4 and drive to Dayton to catch a flight on AirTran because that is frugal and very, very unintelligent. And so we get up and we get there, and I am like forcing smiles, right? It's not good. It wasn't good. And we get there and we're like, oh, okay, finally. You know that feeling when you get to the airport and you're through security and you're like, right? We went to the wrong terminal. If you ever flown out of Dayton, they have two and they're like a mile apart for some dumb reason. And so we're in the very last gate of the wrong terminal. And we hear our name. And we start running. Melissa's in flip-flops, right? We're in travel clothes. And I'm like, give me the bags. I throw my coffee away. I'm pulling the carry-on bags. And she's like, go without me, right? I'm running as fast as I can. I'm like, I'll save you a seat. We get there. We're the last two on the plane. And I'm like, my wife is coming, right? I need oxygen. We get to the boat in Fort Lauderdale, and we go through that process, and we're the first night out at sea, it's okay, we're getting used to everything. The second night, I'm like, hey, I don't feel very good. Melissa's like, what's wrong? And you have to know, especially back then, I could have a little drama in me when it came to things that were health related. And I was prone to being a hypochondriac. Like WebMD would have been really bad back then for me. And she's like, okay, well, you're probably okay. It's probably, well, here's what happened. I was going at warp speed, and then I hit the speed limit. Matter of fact, not even this, I was going like 35 miles an hour. But I was so wired and used to running so quickly for years and years and years and years. And to hit that pause, and nothing, I'm not in control of the boat. I'm not, right? It all came down to a lot of things, and control was one of them. Does that make any sense? Is that resonating for anybody else? So here's what happened. Melissa, like day 2, she's like, well, I'm going to go lay out, which, by the way, is torture to me anyhow, so I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything there. But she's like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to lay here. I think I'm having a heart attack maybe. And by this time, I'm feeling my pulse, and it's all erratic. Truly, it was off. And I'm like, feel this. And she's like, what am I feeling for? She's not a doctor or a nurse. And I'm like, I don't know. My heart goes really fast, and then it's like slow, and I feel like it's skipping around. And she's like, well, go to the doctor. I'm like, did you never watch Love Boat? You don't go to the doctor? It's not like you go to that's going to be like thousands of dollars. I'm not going. And then if there's something wrong, they're going to fly me on a helicopter. We can't afford that, right? And she's like, so your plan is to stay here and maybe die? I'm like, I guess it is. Here's how bad it got. Day 3 or 4, I'm writing letters to our children on Princess Cruise Line letterhead, and I seal them. Melissa comes back from laying out, and I'm like, if anything happens, give me. Why do I tell you this story? I'm not sure. Other than life out of rhythm becomes chaos that you have to live in. And my life was out of rhythm. And when we paused the rhythm, everything was falling. Like it felt like it was on me. Turns out I have preventricular contractions. So PVCs, a misfire in the electrical side of my heart. They don't know exactly where. It hits me from time to time. A couple of Julys ago, I stayed overnight in the hospital. You watched a video of me preaching. That was why. So I can tell when it's out of rhythm now. Like when it's misfiring, right? I can figure that out. I can feel it, but I don't think I'm dying. I just have to pay a little more attention, back off caffeine, or up my heart rate, get my exercise rate up for those moments. Long story, but that acute stress made it clear. And I think we're more prone to be on a hamster wheel than we are in a rhythm of rest. Sabbath rest is part of the design criteria by God for our life. The grand engineer, the grand creator, said this is good for the creation. So I want to embrace that. So July 2nd, last year, 2017, my first Sunday back from sabbatical that became medical leave with my shoulder reconstruction, I preached out of Hebrews chapter 4. If you brought your Bible, turn there. It's the last time I preached on Sabbath because I just experienced how good that was for me, even though it wasn't the way a sabbatical is intended. It was still beneficial for me to rest, and I was forced to rest. The Hebrew writer, when we get to Hebrews chapter 4, he's saying a lot to us about Jesus and about Sabbath. So when you start asking yourself and going through the New Testament, and you look at what did Jesus do on the Sabbath? When we were in the New Narrative series on the Sermon on the Mount, I kept saying, Jesus gave context where the law gave concept, right? He showed us how it really applied to our life. So the Hebrew writer, he's dialing that in to say, this is how it really applies to our life. What did Jesus do on the Sabbath over and over? Jesus was constantly being confronted by the really religious people on the Sabbath. And they would say things like, hey, your disciples are plucking grain on the Sabbath. And so they're walking through a grain field. They pluck some grain, they eat it. And the Pharisees are like, aha, we caught you again. You're not good at this. Right? Somewhere along the way, the beautiful invitations of God were weaponized by religious people against the heart of what God was really trying to bring about. Right? So enter God into the picture, Jesus. This is what he says. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Wow, that's interesting. What does Lord of the Sabbath mean? It means I created it. I'm over it. I'll show you how to do it. That's what it means. When we take communion and Jesus is saying, this is my body broken for you. The cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is spilled for you. He's saying, I'm the sacrifice that gives you opportunity to forever be in alignment, right? Jesus was constantly giving context to what the law gave concept over. So he says things like this, I'm the Son of Man, and I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. And then in Mark 2, he says, Sabbath is for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath serves us. We don't serve it, it serves us. Why would we not like that? So when you get to Hebrews chapter 4, it's saying, the Israelites missed it. Joshua, when they were in the wilderness, all of them, they were missing it. And Joshua's going, let's get this right. And we get to chapter 4, verse 9, and it says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest, meaning embraces Jesus as their Savior, because he is the Lord, anyone who enters this relationship, we don't have to work for it. We get to experience it, and it refines us. The grace we receive with gratitude grows us, right? It doesn't enable us to stay in sin. It grows us from that place of sin, right? So anyone who enters God's rest also rests from his own work just as God did from his. Let us, therefore, make every effort to enter that rest. Amen. Would you say every? I don't know what you have going on in your life, but if we're going to make every effort to enter into this Sabbath rest, there's probably going to have to be some hard conversations about calendars, about priorities, about kids' calendars and kids' priorities. I think it's great that our kids are in things. I think that's great until it becomes work and we're never on pause from work. Does that make sense? If the kids' events become overwhelming work for the parents, then you're not resting parents. And you know what we're passing on to our kids? That you've got to be in everything. You've got to be the best at everything. And we give them this wrong identity that how they perform determines who they are. Right? So they live in a skewed identity. And I think that could be calibrated if we embrace soul Sabbath well. Right? That's why in the commandment, get your family on the page. So maybe every effort to enter into that rest is going to have to be a family discussion. It's going to have to be a family value to some degree, right? And it's so non-North American, and it's so non-North American church to Sabbath. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will fall by following their example, those who didn't do it before Jesus, their example of disobedience. For the word of God is living and active. I get so tired of people that say, well, because of Jesus, I don't have to. No, that is not true. Jesus never said, I came to abolish the law. Matter of fact, he said, I didn't come to abolish. I came to show you how to do it. So what did Jesus do on the Sabbath? Jesus did relationship on the Sabbath. He did it really well, actually. See, here's what I think we can hold on to. When we embrace the Sabbath, we're testifying that God is our creator. That God, you're our creator. When I embrace the Sabbath, I'm saying, you know more than I do. You designed this whole thing. You designed me. Matter of fact, without you, when I embrace Sabbath and I really embrace it, those around me are seeing the living testimony of me saying with my life, God is the creator. I'm not. Right? When we embrace the Sabbath, what we're really embracing is God is our example. Jesus is our example, right? God shows us how to do it. So what do I want to do on the Sabbath? I don't want to work. I'm not going to do things that feel like work. Yesterday was my Sabbath. I try very hard to make Saturday or Friday a day each week that I Sabbath and pause. I really try hard to make that true of my life. So what did I do yesterday? Only things I wanted to do. I made a little thing to hang a Harley sign on that I've been wanting to do forever, and that was so relaxing. It didn't feel anything like work because it was, when you work with your mind, it's nice to relax with your hands. And I was able to see something from the shopping aisle of the supplies to the saws to the painting of it to the hanging of it before I did any. So I try to do a Jewish Sabbath, sundown to sundown, which maybe that's weird, but it seems to work for me because I work with pressure so I can pause with gratitude. So I testify, God, you're creator. You know more than I know. You're the example. Jesus, what did you do? I loved it when the Pharisees, they could never figure Jesus out, and that bothered them. And Jesus didn't help them all that much. He wanted to keep them guessing so that they would stay interested in growing in their own faith. They wanted a transaction. Jesus wanted a relationship. And he still does, by the way. So if you pray a prayer for Jesus to be your Savior, it never stops there. That's just the invitation in the beginning of the embrace. We grow from there, right? But it's really cool. Jesus, you're the example. They're like, hey, Jesus, because they're always trying to trap him, is it lawful for somebody to heal others on the Sabbath? And Jesus, I love it. There's a guy with a shriveled hand right there, and he's like, he fixes his hand right there, right? He heals him. What's he saying? Of course. Why? Because Sabbath is relationship. It's his relationship. Who among us would not help somebody on Sabbath if they were in desperate need all of a sudden? He said, you guys are hypocrites because if one of your sheep falls in a hole, are you going to let it stay in the hole until the next day? No, you're going to go get it. Right? This is that. So what's big on the Sabbath? Relationship. What's big on the Sabbath? Margin. What's big on the Sabbath? Jesus was constantly in the synagogue. The current structure of the church is based off the synagogue structure in the Old Testament that emerged during the Babylonian captivity. Not based on the temple structure, based on the synagogue structure. We do life together. We study the Word of God. We live it out. That's why life groups are such an important part of a synagogue of life, right? Of the relationship of life. It's just big. The third thing we do is we testify that God's our provider. God, you're the provider. You are the one who gives what we need. You are the one who's given me the ability to work. You're the one who gives me air in my lungs. I mean, it's your theopneustos, breath of God in me that helps me. But we get so busy, our breaths are shallow. Or we're winded like me in an airport because I'm a doofus. Right? We don't, wow, breathe it in. It's good. Last thing I would say is, the fourth thing is time's God's love language. Time is God's love language. How incredible that God, the Creator, the one who loves us, the one who made us, the one who sustains us, the one who gives life in its most complicated and most simplified molecular structure says, I want time with you. It's my love language. Quality time is my love language. I love time with my family. I crave time with just Melissa and I. I love our kids. I love them. But, there's a part of me that likes it when they're not around. Does that make me bad? No. It just means that Melissa was here before them. She's going to be here after them, and I still am madly in love. And I love when we get to laugh. I love it when we don't have to have a big agenda. I love it when we don't have some list we're living off of. That's quality time to me. Does that make sense? I think God loves having quality time, and the agenda is don't be busy. On this day, don't be busy. Let's be together. It's good. I really want to do that with you, says the God of the universe. Isn't that awesome? Incredible. Why were we so bad at it? We, present platform included, because we have begun to buy the lie of the culture that more is better. And let me tell you, I think less is more. Less is more. Yes. I know a lot of people that have a lot of stuff, but they don't have a lot of joy. That's right. Why? Because they're constantly working for their stuff. That's right. I don't want to, only free people can take a day off. Yes. Yep. That's right. I don't want to be a willing slave to anything. Right. I never want to be a slave again. Yes. So since May of last year, I have been clawing and making every effort to model before you a Sabbath of rest. And I try to take an additional day off during the week. A lot of times I'm here half day on Friday, or I'm working from home on Friday on wrapping some things up. But Saturday, that's my sweet spot that I really try to let it all be. And sometimes that means I'm on a motorcycle or watching a movie by myself, or I go out to eat by myself. Because Sunday may be her day. Well, Sunday's a day that I'm doing holy work here. Does that make any sense? Yes. Find a day. Figure it out. Have rhythm. Don't abandon the synagogue, the church. We're meant to do this together. Your faith, although personal, was never meant to be private. That's what Sabbath testifies to. So I told you a little bit about McDonald's and how I think they may be the evil empire because they stole God's big idea and marketed it with really corny 1980s, late 70s stuff. However, you know what's interesting? How many of you would prefer to go to Chick-fil-A than McDonald's? Okay. How many of you would prefer McDonald's? Good. Yeah, it's about the same in the first crowd. Here's what's interesting. In 2016, according to QSR magazine, Quick Service restaurant magazine and Statista. In 2014 in the United States, McDonald's had 14,155 locations. In that same time, they closed 114 locations that same year inside the United States. In that same time, Chick-fil-A had 2,102 locations, and in that same time frame, they opened 119 locations. McDonald's have several restaurants that are 24 hours, and they are open 365 days a year on average. On average, Chick-fil-A have no 24-hour restaurants, and on average, they are closed 53 days a year, depending on how the calendar falls with Christmas and Thanksgiving. But they're always closed on Christmas, and they're always closed on Thanksgiving, so I guess they're 54 days a year. Sunday, McDonald's gets the same research that Chick-fil-A does. All the statistics, all the data, all the empirical knowledge that the QSR industry can provide says that Sunday is the most profitable day in the industry to be open. Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday unless there is a disaster in their area. Then they will open and serve food, like when a blizzard hit Atlanta and all the cars were stranded, or floods that followed a tornado in Birmingham, right? They opened up so people could sleep inside, and they were feeding people. McDonald's is publicly traded. Chick-fil-A is privately owned. A lot of interesting things there, aren't there? Here's the most shocking. The average store for McDonald's clears $2.5 million a year. That's their revenue, I guess. 2.5. The average Chick-fil-A, $4.4 million a year. They're working less and making more. They have one store outside the United States. They just put a store in Canada. There's only 48 states that have them. They're on trajectory. I was just down in Atlanta in July, and I met a friend who's a high-up VP. We went to college together at their headquarters at Chick-fil-A. And they're on track to be the number 3 quick service restaurant by 2020. When Truett Cathy died, he made his children sign a contract for him to bequeath it to them, saying they would never sell it to be a publicly traded restaurant, because then the investors determine your morals. Crazy, isn't it? They can sell it, but they can never take it public. Does that make sense? That's how it was worded or whatever. I don't know. I really would like a chicken sandwich right now, but I'll hold off and respect that until tomorrow. So here's the point. Sabbath is good. We see models of it everywhere. God invites us to it. Why don't we embrace it? What do you think? What do you think?